When we work with the voice, we are working with our whole system, so our physicality as well as our emotional state. And what that means is we have to sort of check in with ourselves, see where we're at that moment, and reorganize ourselves a little bit so that we can optimize our vocal usage, because we want to be tall. If our spine is properly aligned, that means the body can take in as much volume as necessary for the thought that we want to convey. Secondarily to that, if we work further and further, we'll have more ability to construct our voice in order to use it in the manner that we so choose. So these two exercises today are kind of a quick little check-in and starting to that reorganization process. Both of these can be done in a chair or standing. The second one could also be done lying down. So this first one is called strings and beams. You'll want to place your feet under your hips or under your shoulders. Keep those knees soft so you can wiggle them a little bit. And then you want to think about a string coming out the top of your head. So if we imagine that this piece of hair here is my string, or think of the skeleton in the A&P lab. So we've got the string going out of the top of our head there. And that's going to help us sort of hang through our skeleton. And then we've got strings at our shoulders pulling to the left and the right wall, and strings at our hip joints pulling to the left and the right wall as well. So we're growing tall and wide. Then we want to think about beams. So there's a beam right in between your eyes for your intellectual center or your thought center. Go ahead and color that beam today, whatever color that may be, and that color may change from day to day or from hour to hour. So color that beam, and that beam goes through the head this way, so forwards and backwards. And then find the beam in your chest center or heart center or emotion center and color this beam. It will be a different color than your thought center. This beam as well goes forward and backwards. And the last one is here in between your pelvic bone or at your belly button. Some see it at the solar plexus, so somewhere in this lower torso portion, somewhere in the middle there. This is really the gut. So this is where your primal instincts survive and live. So this is the primal beam. Color that as well. Now, when you're here, you want to think about, and this may be unnatural for some of you, depending on your layout. We've got a natural curve here in the spine, and I'm exaggerating it. We want to just sort of drop that a little bit. So you might feel as though you're tucking a little here and that you're engaging a little in the abdomen. And that's just because you may not be used to holding the spine in this proper alignment. So we've got a string at the top of our heads, a string from our left and right shoulders, string from our left and right hips. So we're growing tall and wide. And then we've got a beam, 3 different colors in our 3 different locations, our thought center in between our eyes, our heart center right in the middle of our chest here, and then our primal center at our pelvis there in the middle of our pelvis. So now we're growing long and wide and deep. We're 3-dimensional now. Let those arms hang and relax by your side. They're just hanging in those shoulder sockets here. And then you're going to imagine that you have strings attached to your elbows. And those strings are just going to gently pull forward and then drop. Pull those elbows forward and release. And then they're going to pull the elbows forward and up. Everything else is relaxed. And then when you get to a point where those elbows can't float up anymore, you've got a string attached to your wrist. So your wrists are then going to float up. I'm going to sink down so you can see what happens next. And then you've got strings attached to all 5 of your fingers. So all of your fingers are extending. Now check here that your shoulders are not rising up into your ears. If they are, just let them drop back down. Now we're going to imagine that some heavenly scissors come and just chop off, cut the strings attached to just the fingers, and those will flop and release. But you still have the strings attached to your wrist here, right? And then those scissors are going to cut at the wrist. And then the scissors are going to cut at the elbows. And really explore that floppy drop. And then the scissors are going to cut at the top of the head. So the head will drop down, the chin will fall to meet the chest. And from here, you can either roll down through the spine, keeping those knees soft, or you can think about cutting at each vertebrae. So now you've got each vertebrae. And if you need to, you go only as far as you can go, but see if you can really release in that low back. Keep those knees soft. You can bend them. We're not looking to stretch those hamstrings here. And then you're just going to build back up through that spine, working slowly, thinking about stacking one vertebra on top of the next vertebra so that you're coming back up to that tall, floated position. The head is the last thing to come up. Don't worry about fixing your hair or anything like that until you've come all the way up. There are 7 vertebrae in the neck alone, so try and work through each of those. So we're going to do this slightly quicker now, and we're going to add some voice. Once you know this, you can add voice directly right away. So your feet are under your hips or shoulders. You've got a string at the top of your head floating up, strings at your shoulders and your hips, widening and opening your torso and your chest. And then you've got your beams in your thought center, your emotion center, and your primal center, and they are colored differently. And your arms are going to float up, and followed by the wrists floating up, followed by all the fingers floating up. This time when they get cut, each of those strings successively will get cut on an exhale where you vocalize. Huh. 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 So that's your strings and beams. I'll do it from the side for you as well. So again, my feet are under my hips are under my shoulders, head is floating on the top of my spine, got a string coming out of the top of my head, strings coming out my shoulders and my hips, so that I'm tall and wide, and then I've got my beams that are making me grow deep in the space, and together I am 3-dimensional, and I can sense the amount of space that I take up today, and I'm going to allow my voice to then take up that amount of space. Keep those knees nice and soft, so you could bounce them if you need. You can just like wiggle them back and forth. And then your arms will float slowly, starting at the elbows, followed by the wrists, followed by all 5 fingers, remembering to keep those shoulders out of the ears. Try not to arch here, but keep that nice, tall, long spine. On the exhale, those strings will successively get cut. And you don't have to exhale as you roll down and up through the spine. If you get down to the bottom, you can give yourself a little shake, a little jiggle. Yes, shaking of the head, and no shaking of the head. And then rolling back up through the spine, building your spine back up so each vertebra is stacked nicely on top of each other, and the head is the last thing to come up. So that's your strings and beam exercise. This next one is called a scrunch, stretch, and jiggle. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. If you're standing or sitting down or laying on the floor, you're just going to get as small as you possibly can, right? So I would be like crouching down on the floor, but I'll disappear. So everything comes in and in and in as you're inhaling. As you exhale, you get as big as you possibly can, taking up as much space, including sticking that tongue out and vocalizing. And then as you're still exhaling and vocalizing, you just shake it all out. So here's an example of what that looks like. And that's it to the scrunch, stretch, and jiggle. Have fun exploring your voice.